The last weekend of August always felt like a held breath. Shorehaven wore its carnival clothes, string lights zigzagging above the boardwalk, a Ferris wheel drawing halos on the dusk, friars whispering secrets of oil and salt. Jake moved through it with a teacher's late summer ache, half missing his students already, half bargaining for one more blue hour beside the bay. He was carrying a stack of paper plates to his sister's lemonade stand when a voice rose above. The noise, bright, familiar, and immediately dangerous. "Order up. 1 shrimp po', boy, extra pickles." Jake turned like you do when a song you haven't heard in months finds you at the grocery store. Bob stood at the window of a matte blue food truck, forearms dusted with flour, a streak of aioli on his cheekbone like an accidental signature. He looked the same and not same easy steadiness, same laugh that made other laughs join in. New, tired at the edges, new surety in the way he moved in his small borrowed kitchen. They hadn't spoken since March. They'd broken up with the careful cruelty of people who still loved each other. No accusations, just logistics that wouldn't bend. Jake's school calendar, Bob's pop-ups and pop-ins across 3 cities. They'd promised friendship later, then avoided every later that arrived. Jake told himself he could keep walking. He did not even slow down. He stopped. "Hey," he said, because anything more would have cracked. Bob looked up, and the world did that tiny, private thing where it narrows and brightens. "Hey, Jake?" The words were simple. The way he said them was not. A teenager behind Jake sighed with the exaggerated patience of August youth. "Are we ordering or flirting? Because I'm hungry." Bob laughed first. Jake laughed after. It loosened something. "2 lemonades on me," Jake told his sister when he dropped the plates, then doubled back to the truck as if he'd always meant to. Bob slid the service window open wider. Close, he smelled like citrus and heat, basil bruised, under a knife. "You look good," he said. "Teacher tan." "Field day is a contact sport," Jake said. "You look busy." "That too," Bob said softly. "I'm in town for the festival and a couple of menu tests at the inn. Then—" He stopped, eyes flicking to the line forming. "Can you meet me after close? 10? Pier?" The word pier tasted like 100 memories. Lifeguard shifts and midnight swims, July storms, and the time they'd kissed behind the bait shop because the town didn't have a better metaphor. Jake nodded. 10, he said, and felt the decision land in his ribcage like a bird settling. The hours between then and later stretched and snapped. Jake poured lemonade, made change, answered 3 questions about AP schedules from parents who recognized him out of context. He caught glimpses of Bob, head down, hands moving, that quick tenderness he had with food, the way he'd always had with people when he let himself. Every so often, their eyes found each other across the crowd. It felt like tossing a line and having it caught. At 10, Shorehaven yawned but did not sleep. Kids with cotton candy tongues spun under the Ferris wheel. The bay wore the moon like a borrowed coin. Bob leaned on the railing at the end of the pier, hoodie zipped, hair damp from steam and sink water. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I almost didn't," Jake admitted, which probably says everything. "It says we got hurt," Bob said, "and we got busy, and we got proud." They stood with their shoulders not touching. The kind of almost that knows its own weight. "I got offered a kitchen in Chicago," Bob said, voice low, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to say it out loud. "It's the thing I wanted, back when wanting felt like an apology. I start after Labor Day if I say yes." Jake swallowed. He'd known there would be news. He hadn't prepared for a clock. "So this is a goodbye?" he asked, more steady than he felt. "It could be," Bob said. Or, he exhaled, a small, stubborn sound. "We could try something that isn't half of anything. 3 weeks. From now to Labor Day. We actually date. No pretending we're fine or pretending we're not. If at the end we think it's worth it, we make a plan that doesn't break either of us. If we don't..." We stop rerunning us in our heads. Jake looked out at the bay. The water did what water always does. Kept, returned, kept again. He thought about lesson plans and lunch duty, about all the ways he'd learned to stay. He thought about the time Bob had taught him how to salt a tomato, the way it became the thing it had always meant to be. An ultimatum, he said, but there was no sharpness in it. A deadline, Bob corrected gently. So we don't ghost our own lives. The Ferris wheel paused. The town inhaled. Jake turned to him, let himself wear what he felt. Okay, he said. 3 weeks. We choose on purpose. Bob's smile was small and relieved and a little scared. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, Jake echoed, and the summer, which had been holding its breath, exhaled. The next morning arrived like a kept promise. Shorehaven stepped out of its carnival clothes and into its market day apron, canvas tents on the green, peaches blushing in wooden crates, basil scenting the air like a hymn. Jake found Bob by the coffee truck, 2 cups in hand, a napkin folded around a pen. Rules? Bob said, half grinning. Light ones, Jake said. Nothing that makes this feel like homework. They crossed to a picnic table and wrote in thick blue ink. Tell the far. Truth, quickly. Don't solve the future with guesses. Show up when you say you will. Kiss like you mean it. Fight like you're not enemies. They looked at the list and nodded like they'd drawn a map they might actually follow. They walked the stalls with easy caution, that carefulness of people who remember how close they've been and how far they'd had to go. Bob taught him how to pick a peach by scent, not softness. Jake taught Bob the trick to choosing sweet corn, count the silk, listen for the squeak when you press the husk. Small domestic lessons felt like smuggled treasure. Dinner? Bob asked, lifting a bunch of basil that perfumed the space between them. Only if you let me grade your knife skills, Jake said. I'll dazzle you with my safe cuts and humble heart, Bob replied. And Jake laughed, and some old brittle thing inside him softened. They cooked in the inn's test kitchen while the afternoon leaned toward gold. Bob moved like a quiet storm, efficient, gentle with the food. Jake zested a lemon and told a story about the kid who wrote an essay arguing that commas are oppressive. They ate standing, because sometimes chairs slow the honest parts down. When Bob fed him a slice of tomato he'd salted moments before, Jake swore it was the best he'd ever tasted, not because of the tomato, but because Bob watched his mouth and looked relieved. This feels like us, Jake said. It feels like us choosing, Bob answered. In the days that followed, they treated the town like a curriculum. Sunrise swims at the cove. Lunch from the truck on an upturned crate behind the library. A movie projected on a bedsheet stretched between 2 maples, where they whispered commentary and did not pretend not to touch ankles. They made a deadline. Jar out of a pickle jar from Jake's sister's stand, filling it with folded paper. Watch the bats at the old mill, visit the lighthouse at Blue Hour, teach Bob to skip stones without throwing like a shortstop. Each time they pulled a slip, it felt like making good on something they owed themselves. They also practiced the other rule. Tell the truth quickly. Jake said, I hated how we texted through conflict like it was a scheduling problem. Bob said, I hated how I let the road be an excuse for not asking you to come with me sometimes. Jake said, I was scared to want too much. Bob said, me too. They didn't fix it in an afternoon. They named it and kept walking. School crept nearer. Orientation emails stacked like polite bricks in Jake's inbox. The inn asked Bob for a second test night with a visiting critic. One evening, the generator on the truck hiccuped and died. The line dissolved. Bob's jaw went tight. I can help, Jake said, and meant it, even though he was still in his work clothes, tie loosened, shoulders tired. Bob let him hold the flashlight while he coaxed the machine back to life with the kind of patience that had saved them both more than once. When the generator finally caught, their smiles were ridiculous and pure. They bumped foreheads like a prayer. They missed a plan one night. Jake trapped at school by a parent who needed to talk through a teenager's September. Bob cleaned down alone and walked the pier without him. The next morning, they didn't. Pretend it didn't matter. I was disappointed, Bob said. Me too, Jake said. I wanted to be two places at once. Let's not punish each other for being good at the things we are, Bob said. But let's make it up, not outpace it. So they did. They watched the Perseids from the lifeguard chair at midnight, wrapped in one hoodie and the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're hearing the earth turn. It was working. Not as a fantasy, better than that. As a practice. On the 10th night, they were at Jake's kitchen table making a calendar. On the back of a takeout menu, counting the days to Labor Day and filling them with small, specific promises, when Bob's phone buzzed face down. He glanced, then looked again, and the color in his face changed by a shade you could see if you knew him. "Chicago," he said, voice careful. "The chef wants me to come in this Sunday for a stage. It's earlier than we thought." Jake stared at the circles they'd drawn, little moons on paper. The room felt smaller and more honest. "Okay," he said, heartbeat loud. "Then we choose what these next days mean." Bob met his eyes, apology and hope sharing the same space. "We choose like we said," he answered, and the deadline shifted closer, like a tide you respect because you've learned it won't wait. They pulled a slip from the deadline jar at dawn. Lighthouse at blue hour. Ask for what you want in daylight. So they climbed the bluff with coffee in paper cups and a blanket that kept catching at brambles. The lighthouse threw its slow pulse. Across the bay, the horizon brightened like someone opening a door from the other side. "What do you want in daylight?" Jake asked, cup warming his hands. Bob didn't pretend to need time. "A kitchen that doesn't make me choose between craft and kindness, a life where I'm more than the next service, and—" He exhaled, unafraid. "Us if we can build, it without burning down the rest." Jake nodded. "I want my classroom to feel like a place kids arrive to, not escape from. I want to stop performing calm and start living it. And I want to be someone you can count on without me becoming a shadow of your schedule." They let the asks hang, true and ordinary. The gulls heckled. The light kept sweeping. Saturday, they moved through town like they had permission. They bought tomatoes fat as fists and bread that sang when you pressed it. At the inn's test kitchen, Bob seared peaches in brown butter while Jake made a salad. That was mostly herbs and nerve. They ate standing again, elbows bumping, mouths full of August. They also practiced the rule that mattered most. "Tell the truth quickly." "I'm scared," Jake said, slicing basil. "Not of you leaving, of wanting you to stay." "I'm scared," Bob said, tasting for salt, "that I'll leave and come back someone you don't recognize." They didn't. Fix it. They nodded like you do when a storm is on the radar, not surprised, not undone. Sunday came with a suitcase and the quiet of early roads. Jake walked Bob to his truck while the town still held its sleep. The hood wore a lace of dew. Bob put the suitcase in the back, closed the hatch, then opened it again like he'd forgotten something and found it immediately. Time. "Here," Jake said, offering a pencil with his classroom's bite marks near the eraser. It was ridiculous. It felt like a relic. "For tickets, orders, emergencies." Bob smiled, crooked. "For office hours," he said, and handed over a folded recipe. Card, his grandmother's shakshuka, annotated in Bob's blocky hand. Serves, 2 notes. Add feta, argue gently. They hugged like people who knew the difference between clinging and holding. "Tell the truth quickly," Jake said into Bob's hoodie. "Tell the truth quickly," Bob answered, and the engine turned, and he was gone. The truck shrinking down Main like a line drawn clean. The day split into parallel tracks. Jake unboxed new markers and wrote names on desk tents. Evelyn, Mateo, D, saying each out loud like a promise. He straightened posters, pinned a map, built a seating chart that kept enemies apart and conspirators within whispering range. He ate a sandwich standing at the window and watched the playground spin its own weather. In Chicago, Bob texted in bursts between rushes. 17. Alive. Chef is a human, not a myth. Kitchen hums like a chorus. 48. Family meal was lentils and jokes. Asked if I can plate the halibut tonight. 06. I did not drop a single thing. I did not even dream of dropping a thing. 33. Service is a river. I'm learning where to stand. At 11:42 p.m., his name lit Jake's phone. How was it? Jake asked, already smiling at the way Bob's breath sounded like relief. Good, Bob said, then corrected, truth quick and bright. More than good. It felt like I've been practicing scales for years and suddenly someone handed me a song that fits my hands. They offered. They want me. There's a start date. 10 days. They want an answer by Tuesday. The room shrank, then steadied. Jake stared at the circles and check marks on their hand-drawn calendar, at the little moons that now felt like crumbs. 10 days, he repeated. I know, Bob said, and Jake could hear how wide awake he was, and how tired. It steals some of our days. I hate that. I hate that too, Jake said, and heard the edge in his voice before Bob did. He breathed, then tried again. I'm glad you felt like that. I'm glad the song fits. A beat. Then Bob. Thank you for saying both. They didn't fight. They named the pinch and stood still so it didn't bruise. Don't drive back tonight, Jake said, practical as a stop sign. Sleep. Text me when your alarm snoozes. Call me when you're on the road. We'll use what we have left. We won't spend it rehearsing the goodbye. Deal, Bob said. Also, tell me something ordinary about your day. Jake looked at the pile of extra name tents, at the jar on his counter with slips left and not enough days to empty it. I put the kid who argues commas next to the kid who draws galaxies in the margins, he said. I think they'll teach each other. Scale. Bob laughed warm. I love you, he said, not as a crescendo, but like a required line the scene had earned. I love you, Jake answered, and the words arrived without wobble. Monday afternoon, Bob returned sun-tired and city-buzzed, suitcase scuffed like a story. They met at the pier, the water holding its same old patience. Bob told him about the pass, the way the chef called behind like a blessing, the way the dishwashers told the truest jokes. Jake told him about the kid who asked if a syllabus could include snacks. They made a draft, right there on the railing with a pen that didn't want to write on damp wood. Yes to the job, yes to us. 6 months of trains and set weekends. A 9:30. Call that was not cancelable by fatigue. A rule against ending anything over text. A second jar, mailed between cities, full of things to do together when apart. Labor Day was 5 days away. Fireworks testers popped a single green bloom over the bay and then left the sky alone. They stood in the afterglow, holding the same line. Tuesday, Bob said. I say yes. Tuesday, Jake said. We decide how to hold it. Tuesday tasted like decision. Bob stood in the inn's back lot with the sun on the hood of his truck and called Chicago. He said yes. The chef said, welcome home, like a dare and a blessing. Bob laughed, covered his eyes, and let the relief wash through him like tide over stones. Jake was waiting on the school steps when he arrived, tie loosened, a stack of laminated hall passes under his arm. Bob didn't make a speech. He simply nodded, a small, steady motion that meant everything. So we keep both promises, Jake said. The job, and us. We do, Bob answered. On purpose. They took the napkin with their rules and rewrote them on index cards, straight lines instead of squiggles. Tell the truth quickly. Don't solve the future with guesses. Show up when you say you will. Kiss like you mean it. Fight like you're not enemies. They added 2 more. The 9:30 call is sacred. No ending anything over text. Then they opened a clean pickle jar and fed it slips that said, "For when we're apart. Cook the same recipe on video. Mail each other something that smells like home. Leave each other a voice note before bed, even on the good days." The last days of August moved like a careful parade. Jake labeled cubbies and taped down the corner of a rug that liked to wander. He practiced names, Evelyn, Mateo, D, until they felt like he was learning the song before the band came in. Bob ran one last pop-up at the pier, sold out of corn, fritters in an hour, and gave the last 2 to a pair of kids who argued about whether the Ferris wheel was a metaphor. They emptied the original deadline jar like fishermen honoring a pact. Bats at the old mill, check. Blueberry pancakes at midnight. Sticky plates, sleepy grins, check. Teach Bob to skip stones without throwing like a shortstop. 6 skips on calm water, a whoop that startled a heron, check. On the pier, they read the final slip together. Ask for what you want, even now. "I want visits circled in ink, not pencil," Jake said. "I want to miss you without making it your fault. I want your classroom stories even when I'm between courses," Bob said. "I want to love you without asking you to be a satellite to my stove," they promised in sentences, not slogans. October. Jake's fall break in Chicago. 4 days, museums, and a tiny restaurant that always smells faintly of oranges. November. Bob back for Thanksgiving week. A pop-up to fund the train fare. Shakshuka on Sunday morning using his grandmother's card. 2 weekends a month, one here, one there, and if a storm or a service wrecked the plan, they'd reschedule before they apologized. Labor Day arrived loud and tender. Shorehaven did what it always did. Parade at 10, grills at noon, naps at 3. Bob returned the spare fryer to a friend and folded his truck's awning like a flag. Jake arranged name tents on each desk, a constellation of possibilities waiting to be called. At dusk, they met at the pier with a paper bag of fried dough between them, sugar dusting their hands like early snow. "I'm not ready," Jake said, honest as breath. "Me neither," Bob answered. "Same. They didn't fix it. They held it." Bob pulled a small thrift store frame from his backpack, the napkin with their summer rules, flattened and neat. "For your desk," he said, "so your kids think you're extremely organized." Jake snorted, then pulled a ring from his pocket, with a single brass key. "For plants and packages," he said, "and for when Shorehaven needs you to come home and argue gently." "I will," Bob said, and kissed him like the rules instructed. Present, unhurried, leaving room for tomorrow. The fireworks began with a green bloom that painted the bay in borrowed color. The Ferris wheel paused on a high note. Someone on the beach cheered too early and then laughed at themselves. Jake leaned his forehead against Bob's and felt the summer let go without dropping them. "This wasn't really an ultimatum," he said, half into Bob's hoodie. "It was a door." Bob squeezed his hand. "Then let's walk through." They stood there while the sky wrote its brief, loud poem. When the last spark fell, September stepped forward, ordinary and enormous. Jake's phone buzzed. A calendar. Reminder for first period. Bob's buzzed too. 9:30 call, daily, no exceptions. They smiled like men who had chosen and would keep choosing, picked up the empty bag and headed back along the boards, the water keeping its patient beat beside them. Loved Jake and Bob's end-of-summer second-chance romance? Like, comment, subscribe, and share to keep the stories coming.